So I think this episode will possibly be my favorite titled episode of all of our episodes. So we are going to talk about French fries today, which I just love. I think we're just going to call the episode French fries.
I
Nothing
love that.
with no other text needed. So Dr. Eloise, I know you have been doing some, I'm going to call it random research on French fries, but how it ties into our podcast and our audience, of course, is all of the supply chain and environmental impacts and all of the health alternatives or health concerns or things that are coming up around French fries. So I thought this is such a fun, random thing for us to talk about. And probably all of us at some point in our lives have consumed a French fry.
I've consumed plenty of them.
I
Uh,
love I just want to do a shout out for sweet potato French fries.
okay. Yeah,
If you've not ever, I love sweet potatoes, and so I love sweet potato French fries.
I like waffle cut fries are my favorite with like cheese sauce, but I think we're getting off topic. Yeah, we could just talk about what we love. Okay, so again, I will refer you to Johnny Cash because we're going to dance around politics here, but that's not the goal of this podcast. But essentially, the new head of Health and Human Services for the U.S. is Robert Kennedy Jr., who has a lot of things that he is beliefs that he thinks are need to be changed in the American healthcare system and diet and whatnot. And one of those things is seed oils. For some reason, he is anti seed oil. And most of the fries here and many fried things here in the US are fried in seed oil. Now, I'm not a chemist. I'm not a food person. I don't know all the the, uh, the nuances of all that. However, so as part of this push to eliminate seed oils, Steak and Shake, the QSR, the quick service restaurant or quick service retail, they announced that they are going to fry their fries in beef tallow, moving away from soybean oil. So Robert Kennedy went there to champion that Steak and Shake did this thing. And great, fine. Like that was interesting. But as you would expect, there were some critiques. And in the critiques, somebody pointed out that what happens at the restaurant is actually just the fries are prepared elsewhere, cooked elsewhere, and then frozen and then shipped to the individual restaurant. And then when they're fried at the restaurant, yes, they're fried in beef tallow, but actually when they're originally fried, they're fried in seed oil and wait for it, because of the French fry supply chain. And that just caught my attention. And I'm like, oh my God, because the person being interviewed said, yeah, you cannot buy a commercial French fry that is not produced in seed oil, and it's not easy to just replace seed oil in that whole production process. And so then my mind went into procurement supply chain mode, and it was going a million miles a minute. And so then I had to go back and really think about this, is that uh yeah, like so many things, like we are getting a front row seat, much like with Doge, a front row seat to how procurement works, that you can imagine yourself as like changing the way you fry it, but actually, if you're not looking at the end-to-end supply chain of how that fry got there, then oh my God. So that was the first bit, and I'll let you react to
Yeah,
that.
well, that it's kind of like our ESG episode we did
Yeah.
where we talked about packaging. I used to do a lot of work in the packaging space, and a big challenge with recycling is you can't just come in and pick one part of
Hmm.
the supply chain and solve the recycling problem. It's a whole end-to-end challenge that involves city and state and government, and there's many larger things at play. So it's very similar to that, where you can't just come in and pick one part of it and expect to solve the problem. It's a much broader scope. I will also say that for those of us who are vegetarian and vegan, I don't love the idea of French fries being cooked in beef broth or beef, or it just makes it more difficult for those of us with dietary needs to
Yeah.
eat French fries.
Yeah. And by the way, beef tallow comes from let's just say slaughtering of cows. I can't think of a more easier term on that. But essentially, so that has its own, let's say, environmental impact of its own, of just the production of beef and the what it takes to produce that. So not exactly a great change.
Yeah, and where my mind goes when you mentioned us chatting about French fries is how important cost is in the
Hmm.
supply chain, especially when we're talking about mass consumption of food. There are many people that cannot afford to shop at places like a Whole Foods, for example. And if we are going to come in and re-engineer food, not saying that I don't agree that there are things in our in our diet and in our supply chain that shouldn't be changed and that are unhealthy, but I think we need to look at the cost impacts of what this does for the typical American family who doesn't have a lot of extra income and can't afford a 10 or 15% cost increase on food. So if we go back and, let's say in this example, are going to sub out seed oils, I assume there's a pretty big cost implication that the companies that are producing the food products, in this case the French fries, they're going to be passing along some of the cost to their customers, like a Steak and Shake, which means that's going to be then passed along to the end consumer. So my mind immediately goes to cost, and that's just such a huge concern when it comes to food.
Right. And ultimately you end up in this, like, again, go back to the supply chain of how we get that fry to the Steak and Shake is we it has to be pre-produced, pre-fried somewhere else, and or pre-prepared, I should say, somewhere else, to make it to do wide scale distribution. I mean, these are fundamental supply chain issues, which I think it's just so utterly fascinating. Like, and again, without even making a judgment on it, it's just because cost is a factor. And then the flip side, which is what In and Out does, is they take a potato, and you can see them, and like they just put, like, what is it? They pull the lever down of a potato like cutter, and the potato falls into the fryer, and they cook the fries that way. So like you could say at some point the cost forces you to switch how you do that, and I think these are fascinating issues, at least to me.
Hmm. So let's talk a little bit more about, I guess, supply chain, like the implications on supply chain for the food industry this year as it comes to this new kind of focus and evaluation on health, and what you think that's going to do. I mean, that's going to potentially, French fries is one example, right? But I feel like there's going to be a lot of other potential changes coming down the pipe.
Well, right, and actually funny, and well, we'll have to talk about the flip side of this, which is of course the sustainability angle. But I do think the use of dyes and preservatives, those are some things that RFK is trying to eliminate. I haven't followed this closely, but I guess he doesn't like diet soda or soda in general. So I don't know how that's going to play out, but it does sort of, like, for the first time here in the US, we're getting challenged on the status quo of ingredients in this food supply chain. And a lot so why do you put preservatives in? Well, it keeps your shelf stability longer. It'll keep the food drier or wetter, depending on what it needs, on and on and on throughout the supply chain. And so, like, these are fundamental things to reckon with that it's going to change the formulas, the recipes, the production. So I do think for the first time in a long time, these are sort of wide scale changes. And just parenthetically, I would also add that governance around the regulation and the USDA and what will pass through inspections is also changing, and probably not for the better because they seem to want to deregulate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, all these changes, there's costs involved. Testing, reconfiguration, building new recipes, changing manufacturing production, and organizations are not going to eat the cost of this solely. So there is going to be pass along to us as the end consumers.
Yeah, and it's going to force us to really rethink some of these supply chains to how we produce this stuff. And again, like um, back to the In-N-Out example. In-N-Out is I guess it's West Coast certainly, but
they're in Texas also, because that was a
okay.
big deal. I don't eat it In-N-Out, but it was a big deal when I lived in Austin for a few years. Texans were very excited and happy to have In-N-Out in their state.
So anyway, but their sort of thing
But
is that
primarily West Coast. Yeah, that was a new market, new supply chain for them.
yeah, so they've used like studying In-N-Out is a whole interesting thing because they do really well and it's a very simple menu. And but again, back to this idea, as at what point does it make sense to just do it on site? And interestingly, like, I'm going to go on a tangent here, but for those of you over 40 will remember Pizza Huts. And one of the Pizza Hut is a chain of pizza restaurants here in the U.S. that sort of has fallen on hard times. And many of us that grew up in the 80s and 90s went and celebrated major milestones at the local Pizza Hut. And it was always, they had a salad bar in the middle, and they made all the pizza fresh. And one of the reasons why they have fallen off in popularity is they used to cut all the ingredients, do all the stuff right there in the restaurant, each local restaurant. And over time, they changed it so they pre-produced everything up the supply chain to then, so it's basically you're just cooking it or reheating it at the restaurant, which of course changes the taste. And I think it gets to some of these like fundamental, much like we've outsourced for 30, 40 years, everything across the globe, we've also changed the way we've done production and distribution at least here in the US for food. And I think I don't know if it's going to change, but it's a moment of reevaluation.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about the sustainability impact of this whole French fries story. I know when you go on and research French fries and the Steak and Shake and all the things that the Kennedy administration's working on, something that comes up a lot is the sustainability piece.
Yeah.
And how there is significant waste involved in the French fry supply chain, which is relevant to many other food distribution channels as well. But I know that that's something that's also kind of a hot topic that ties into this is how do we become more sustainable in the French fry supply chain when you're talking about, let's just say, packaging waste as an example, right? When you've got bulk frozen French fries being shipped all over the US, and there's a lot of waste involved with the packaging and the transport of getting those French fries distributed.
Yeah, and so for, this is another random rabbit hole I went down because I saw on LinkedIn somebody posted why McDonald's fries are so bad. This was like a year or two ago, of why they're so bad for the environment. And of course, all right, well, you got me. I gotta go watch watch this video. But and then that's taken me then it takes you down a rabbit hole, and then they gotta validate this and this and that. So congratulations, social media, you hooked me again. But one of the first things is that McDonald's apparently uses russet potatoes, which are russet Burbank potatoes, which they take a lot of water, they take a lot of water and land, and significant use of pesticides, um, and so the question, so again, do you and then I'll and one of the things about the russet Burbank is the uniformity, and McDonald's apparently likes uniformity in their French fries. And by the way, again, not making a judgment here, just sort of pointing out as I understand it. And it's it, so it's here you have a very specific specification of what the potato and the end French fry need to look like. Whereas In-N-Out, just by comparison, it's random, but it's fresh. And so there is a question of how much do we, just like with other major agricultural production, like, is it worth it to get perfect potatoes, to get perfect size French fries, et cetera, et cetera? And I think these are questions that we're going to be forced to confront here over the years, especially as climate change changes how we do agriculture and so forth. And so I would sort of, while in the U.S. we don't seem to be very particularly concerned about sustainability at the moment, these are decisions that individual companies can choose to make should they want to, and they'll probably make them in response to consumer demand, because maybe we go to more fresh or local sourced ingredients, or maybe we don't. And again, I'm not pointing out one way or the other, but I do think it is really interesting to ask these questions about, like, fundamental product questions when it comes to food, of do we need perfectly cut French fries, and the russet Burbanks also have low moisture, so it helps keep them longer, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know. It's fascinating. I never thought that French fries would be so, like, complicated.
Well, and it goes, I mean, a lot of that is a marketing ploy or marketing play for McDonald's. They want consistency and repeatability. So a customer who goes to a McDonald's here in the Bay Area versus a McDonald's in Nashville versus a McDonald's in New York has a very similar experience. They want people to be able to know what they're going to get and then actually get that. So when you add fresh local source, you're going to get some variety, right? And not as much consistency, which you could argue, does that really matter? And I would say to McDonald's, it does. It's a big part of their brand, and it's a big part of their marketing. So it's a health question, it's a sustainability question, but it's a much broader question of what is their brand and who is McDonald's going to be in the future.
Yeah, and by the way, I'll be the first to admit I love Starbucks, and I I consume Starbucks at many, many, many locations across the US and even globally, and I love the consistency. Like, I expect the consistency, and that's why I'm loyal to the brand. By the way, not a sponsor, but open to it. But I love the consistency. And so I get it. So I wouldn't be the first, so I won't be hypocritical, say, oh, McDonald's, you got to do because Starbucks has its own issues, but I buy into the consistency thing, because yeah, for sure.
And then I think the packaging comes into play here as well. Again, just when I was in marketing procurement, a big part of what I was doing towards the end of my time in procurement was packaging, and sustainability was a big topic. Is sustainable packaging actually sustainable? Right? That was a big question. Is it actually viable? Does it work? Will it carry and transport product as we need it to, so there's not damage? That was a big question around the viability of it. And then there was the whole question around, if we have sustainable packaging, what does that mean? Is it that it's reusable? Are we going to be able to reuse something 3 or 4 times? And if so, would we actually reuse it? Does that make sense? And then, or is there a way for packaging to become biodegradable, where it's not just piling up in landfills? And I haven't continued to follow the story, but a big story was IKEA was testing packaging made out of mushrooms. So there was this whole project that they were working on around engineering it and then actually testing it out with customers. And in theory, you were supposed to be able to take the packaging from a product that you bought in a store or online and then put it in your biodegradable bin and or put it in your garden, and it was supposed to completely disintegrate. Now, again, I haven't continued to follow it now that I'm no longer in that space, but one of the big concerns and complaints was smell. Right? Not something you would necessarily think about, but imagine the smell of a mushroom, 3, 4, 5 weeks after. So my point is, it's very complicated and there's all of these things that we need to think about. But I think as we think about sustainability in the food supply chain and specifically around French fries, we also need to look at the packaging piece of it, because there's a lot of waste that comes from that. When you look at a McDonald's, I think one of the stories you shared said they get, the average McDonald's gets something like 2 to 3 frozen French fry deliveries a week. Right? You multiply that by, I don't know, 20, 30,000 locations. That's a lot of packaging to dispose of and deal with afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, this is, I guess maybe I would sort of like, I want to make a point. It's my concluding point, though we don't have to conclude, but I do think there is this, like, these questions, we can answer them. Like, we are being confronted with these questions because we have access to the information. And I think one of the great things, or sort of talking about the methodology going into this episode, is I had these random bits of information that I remembered, like, oh, I saw that LinkedIn thing about McDonald's potatoes and the Steak and Shake thing is, and so then I just went to Deep Research, to Gemini Deep Research, and asked it to pull together all this, and it created a report in no time. It also created an audio overview. And I've been sort of asking questions as we've been talking to, I put it in a Notebook LM, as we talked about in a previous episode. And I've been, so I have access to data, sort of random thoughts that I was able to put into a research paper, essentially, that Gemini created. And then I've been able to query the data as we've been talking. And the reason I say that is, we are now at a place where consumers and youngins have access to this information and at our fingertips. The whole exercise took me 60 seconds on Tuesday after we talked, and we've done a whole 30-minute episode on this now. And so I do think from a marketing brand point of view, there is a difference. And actually, this is true for politicians when you just say, well, we are not doing seed oil anymore, when in reality, you can figure out that, well, with just one simple question to Gemini, like, well, yeah, but the whole supply chain works like this, and it's all da 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 da. And so I think the fact, to me, the most amazing thing is how democratized this information is, that any consumer can get this at any time. And so it's not just going to be the McDonald's or the Starbucks or the whomever's leadership sitting in the boardroom. You've got thousands, or if not hundreds of thousands, consumers interacting with the same data, making their own determinations, and more importantly, their own content about this.
Yeah. And I would say a good reminder is the power consumers hold the power.
Hmm.
Government can say or do whatever they want, corporations can say or do whatever they want, but money talks. And the
Yes.
consumers are the ones spending the money and driving. So as we continue to see things like the French fries story come to light, it really is going to be what do consumers think and how are they going to act?
And if you want good insight, just go to social media because much of this information is not only readily available, but people are creating content with that information to influence and change how people think about a brand, a product, or whatever.
Mhm. All right, is that a wrap for today? The French
I,
fry episode.
I think that's a wrap, but please tell us your favorite type of French fry or chip if you're over in the UK in the comments below. And I am now craving French fries, so I am definitely gonna go go get some today.
All right, see you all back next week.